The sun was just dipping below the horizon, bleeding fiery orange across the wide, empty sky. Dust swirled in the wind across the dirt streets of Dry Creek, a small, lonely town clinging to the edge of nowhere. A single tumbleweed bounced along Main Street, and the wooden saloon doors squeaked in protest at the wind. Inside the saloon, the night had already begun. Piano music clinked from the corner, and laughter spilled like whiskey over the tables of card players and cowboys. And there, sweeping up shards of broken glass, Clara Mayfield kept her head down. The men called her Crazy Clara when they thought she couldn't hear. Her life had been a string of misfortunes, whispered about like superstition. Her mother had died of fever, her father had gambled away their small farm, and the last man she trusted ran off after calling her cursed. Since then, she had drifted from job to job, never looking anyone too long in the eye. "Hey, Clara," one of the card players jeered. "You gettin' sweet on another one of them cowboys tonight? Or they all too human for YA?" Laughter rippled across the room. Clara's cheeks burned. It was an old, cruel joke. They said she lived in her daydreams, crushing on men who were out of her league, men with boots dusty from real work and hearts that didn't have time for broken girls. She swallowed the hurt and bent to sweep up the last shards of a dropped whiskey glass. The saloon doors creaked. The laughter faltered. A tall, shadowed man stepped inside, framed by the last light of the dying sun. His coat was travel-stained, his boots scuffed, and his hat dipped low. But it wasn't his appearance that silenced the room, it was the quiet danger that rode in with him, like a rattlesnake coiled and waiting. "Evening," he said, his voice low and steady. No one answered. A chair creaked. The man's gaze swept the room and finally landed on Clara. He didn't leer or smirk the way the others did. He simply nodded once, as if seeing her for the first time in her life. Middle, love in the shadow of trouble. His name, she would learn, was Luke Brenner. A drifting cowboy, some said. An outlaw, others whispered. Clara didn't know the truth, and she wasn't sure she cared. Over the next weeks, he came and went from town, leaving whispers behind him. Sometimes she'd see him at the edge of the street, tightening the saddle on his chestnut mare, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. Sometimes he'd sit in the saloon, quiet as a shadow, watching the room while sipping coffee instead of whiskey. One evening, the saloon was nearly empty when he approached her. "You don't belong here," he said softly, leaning against the counter as she polished mugs. Clara stiffened. "Got nowhere else to be." He studied her, his gaze steady but not unkind. "They laugh at you," he said simply. Her throat tightened. "I know." "Let 'em," he murmured. "They ain't worth a damn anyway." Something in her cracked. No man had ever said a kind word to her without wanting something in return. And Luke, he didn't seem to want anything. Days passed. Then, like a storm rolling in from the desert, trouble followed him. 3 men rode into Dry Creek one dusty afternoon, guns visible on their belts. Their leader, a broad, scarred man with a wolfish grin, marched into the saloon and slammed a hand on the counter. "Where's Luke Brenner?" he barked. Clara froze. "Ain't seen him," she whispered. The man leaned in. "You tell that traitor we'll gut him like a hog next time." That night, Luke appeared in the alley behind the saloon, where Clara was dumping dishwater. "You got enemies," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "Had 'em for years." He hesitated, then reached out and brushed a stray curl from her face. "I won't bring that danger to you." "Then why are you here?" His jaw tightened. "Because you're the first person who looked at me like I ain't the monster they say I am." Danger and loyalty. The next morning, chaos erupted in Dry Creek. The 3 riders were back, and this time, they weren't just threatening. Luke had warned her to stay inside, but Clara heard the shouting and couldn't help herself. From the saloon's front window, she saw Luke in the middle of the street, facing the 3 outlaws. The townsfolk scattered. Dust swirled around them like smoke from hell. "Brenner," the scarred man roared. "Time to finish what we started." Luke didn't flinch. "You leave this town. You leave her. Or you'll regret breath in this air." The man laughed and went for his gun. The world slowed. A shot rang out, then another. Dust and gunpowder filled the air. Clara screamed, rushing onto the porch just in time to see the scarred man hit the dirt. One of the other outlaws fled. The last lay clutching his shoulder, groaning. Luke staggered. A bullet had grazed his side, blood soaking into his shirt. "Luke!" Clara cried, running to him. She pressed her hands to the wound, shaking. He caught her wrist. "I told you to stay inside." "Then who would keep you alive, fool cowboy?" she snapped, tears blurring her vision. Something broke in his stoic face then, and for the first time, he smiled, not the careful, guarded twitch of lips she'd seen before, but a real, soft smile meant only for her. Redemption and love. Luke survived, though Clara spent 2 nights in the back room of the saloon, changing bandages and praying. Word spread quickly. He'd killed the outlaw leader in a fair fight, and the others were gone. The town that once mocked her now treated her differently. When she walked down Main Street, no one laughed. Perhaps it was because she was the woman who saved the man who saved the town. Or perhaps it was the way Luke's arm stayed draped protectively around her shoulders whenever they stepped outside. One evening, as the sun bled red across the desert once more, Luke stood on the porch of the saloon, staring toward the endless horizon. "You'll leave," Clara said quietly. It wasn't a question. He hesitated. "I never meant to stay anywhere. I don't belong." "Yes, you do," she said fiercely. "You belong here. With me." The wind tugged at his coat. He turned, eyes dark with something she couldn't quite name. Fear, hope, maybe both. "They laughed at me," she whispered. "For loving the idea of someone like you. For crushing on men who'd never see me. But you saw me." He stepped closer and cupped her face in his rough hands. "I see you, Clara. Always have. And I ain't leaving. The kiss was slow, gentle, and tasted of redemption. Ending, a home in the dust. Weeks passed, and the desert began to bloom after a rare rain. Luke bought a small patch of land on the edge of Dry Creek with the money the sheriff gave him as a reward for ridding the town of its outlaws. Together, they built a simple cabin, its walls smelling of fresh-cut pine. Life wasn't easy. The wind still howled at night, and dust still coated everything they owned. But when Clara woke in the morning to the warmth of Luke's arm around her, or when she heard his low hum while fixing a fence post, she knew she had found something she never thought she'd have. A love that stayed. The townsfolk eventually stopped whispering and started nodding politely when they passed. No one called her Crazy Clara anymore. And every now and then, as the sun dipped and the horizon caught fire, Luke would take her hand and say, with a half-smile, "They laughed at you for loving humans, huh? Well, guess the joke's on them." And Clara would laugh, resting her head against his chest, the sound of the desert wind now a lullaby instead of a lonely howl.